Hi everybody, welcome to First Friday Lunch. Hopefully this is coming in pretty clear for you because I'm recording it on my Chromebook versus doing it on StreamYard or even YouTube Live. Today's topic is actually going to be, I'm going to talk about traditional publishing, indie publishing, and small press publishing. And the reason that I'm going to talk about this today is because I have this Regency romance that I'm putting the final edits on, and I'm looking for a home for it. And so I'm kind of polishing it up, finishing my layering that I'm doing on it, and I'm kind of looking for a home. And in doing a lot of my research, I may end up either indie publishing this or going straight on traditional, and I haven't decided which one I'm going to do yet, so it's kind of a thing. So let's kind of break down a little bit about what the differences are, and these are just some definitions that I found on the web. They're not all inclusive or all encompassing, so you can kind of, you may have heard different definitions about stuff, but traditional publishing, what we're talking about the big five. And so the traditional publishing, the definition that I found on the web is traditional book publishing is when a publisher offers an author a contract and in turn prints, publishes, and sells your book through booksellers and other retailers. And in this particular scenario, what we're talking about is going wide. So you're going to be in libraries, you may also have audio, you may have foreign rights, those types of things. And generally, when you're working with a traditional publisher, you usually have an agent. So you're talking about one of the big five. If you're in romance like I am, most of the traditional publishers are probably going to be owned by HarperCollins, because HarperCollins actually owns Avon, Harlequin, and some of the other presses that definitely fall underneath romance. Sorry about the bird. But then there's also Random House, there's Simon & Schuster, there's a few more too, but I think it used to be 7 back when I started in this industry, and now it's 5. So that's what we're talking about. When I talk about traditional publishing, I'm referring to those big New York contract type things. So where you get you would get an advance, and then you'd have royalties and that sort of thing. And generally speaking, it's easier to get into those publishing houses with an agent. Not always. Sometimes they'll have contests. Sometimes you can meet directly with editors, either at conferences or they're hosting something online, or they're taking pitches at one of these Twitter pitch fests. So that's another way that you can kind of get your foot in the door. But generally, you're looking usually for an agent, especially if you're looking to try and get some high dollars. Now, indie publishing. When I'm talking about indie publishing, this can also refer to small press publishers, which may refer to themselves as indie presses or independent publishers. But in indie publishing, like indie films or indie music, is where the creator of the content owns the product and hires professionals to assist them to produce the quality product. So when we're talking about indie, that may be the author, it may be a small press, it may be, but it's generally, you're not talking about advances or even necessarily having to work with agents in order to get in. That's not to say that they don't exist, but it's just usually the contracts are boilerplated if you're working with a small press. And so, but you'll hear people use these terms interchangeably. When I'm talking about indie publishing, I'm usually using that to refer to self-publishing as we understand it today. So, and then the last thing I'm looking at is I may go back to a small press. I've kind of looked at them too. I do like working with small press, and a small press is a publisher with an annual sales below either a certain dollar amount or a certain number of titles that they put out. And like I said, you'll sometimes hear small presses also referred to as indie presses or independent publishers. So it really depends on what you're looking for as a writer. I'm looking basically for this book, which I think I'm going to call it Secrets and Spies. I think that's going to be the title. That's the working title anyway. The original title was What Charlotte Wants, but I added this spy layer into it. So now I'm going to call it Secrets and Spies. So I think that it's going to be on the shorter side of a novel. It's just going to hit that 50,000 mark. So it's just there. It's probably not going to be much more than that. And I'm not sure that it would have a home in traditional publishing, which may mean that I've either got to go back to a small press, which I'm fine doing, or maybe I'll independently publish this one myself. I've been doing some research online as well. And one of the things I've noticed when I've been kind of going through like Nook and Amazon is that a large number of the top 100 in most genres within romance tend to be self-published or independently published. I'm not seeing a lot of, at least, and that's going to depend on which month you do it, because I think their top 100 is, I don't know, I think it might be by a week or something like that. But when I went ahead and I dug into specifically Regency Romance and looked at the top 10% of that, I think I actually have my no, I left my notes downstairs, but a good chunk of them, I was surprised how many were self-published. And by self-published, that means I did research on the press, which maybe the author is operating under a press because they may be bigger than just themselves. Like if I was going to print something, I would probably publish it under Tina Holland, even though I do have a press name out there, but I don't publish other people's work. So I probably wouldn't use a press name. And then the other thing is that for people like me that do research, I kind of want to know, oh, if you're the author, do you own the press? And there are some authors that do. And so when I dug down into my research, I found out there was a significant number of indie published or self-published books. This was a case too when I did research on steampunk. Same thing. I ended up finding authors that were, I think, prolific, but then also that the market wasn't looking for that type of work. Another reason that I'm kind of exploring self-publishing or going back to small presses is that there was recently a New York Times article out, and I haven't had a chance to read it myself, but basically said that traditional publishers sold, I think it's something like, let me see if I can find the article. It's something like sold less than 5,000 copies in books on their, I don't know if it was their top sellers or what the article was, but if anybody actually knows the article, please put a link to the in the comments down below so that people can find out about it, because like I said, I haven't, it sounds like it's rather startling. I heard about it from Kate Kavanaugh. I watch her channel, and she had mentioned it there. So, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So I also think too, with the pandemic, it seems like a lot of authors are moving towards self-publishing or indie publishing. And I almost think it might be because it's something you can control. You can control the timeline of your books. You can control, how fast you want to release them, how slow you want to release them. And I think that that's always boiled down to people that are drawn to indie publishing is the control that they feel over it. I'm sort of the opinion, like I want to write the story. I want to edit it to the best of my abilities, but then I really just want to pass it off. So the part that's intimidating for me when I look at self-publishing versus working with a publisher, I think is that there's so much work I have to do by myself. I got to contract the cover artist. I have to contract an editor. And I have worked with editors other than my publishing house editors, because my current publisher is operates more as a distributor. And so I hire the editor. So I think that part's less intimidating, but I have a release date, and then do I do pre-orders, and how do I do pre-orders? Do I have to hire somebody to do all the formatting? Because this all just seems very, very intimidating to me. The other thing is, right now, one of the reasons this is recorded is because I'm going to actually start my job. So, which is my husband is a crop duster, and so I help him in the summertime. I'm loading airplanes and I'm managing the accounts and that sort of thing. So this is our busy season. Really, we get busy in July, but we're going to have an open house tomorrow. So that is one of the reasons that I'm pre-recording this. So I think that I really don't have time in the summertime to go ahead and do these things. In the fall, I do. And actually, even in the fall, that's when I start looking at side hustles like narration. I start looking at maybe acting locally to see, because that was a passion of mine when I was younger, to see if there's parts available and stuff like that. So that's always when I start looking for stuff. And so if I was going to do that, I'd probably have to have like a release date in, I don't know, either next spring, because I'm guessing it would take 6 months just to bone up on stuff. But during that time frame, I'm still have to contract the editor and the cover artist to do that stuff. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just take the summer and pitch it all over the place, and then in the fall decide whether or not I'm going to independent publish. The other thing is too is I've worked so well with book boutiques, and they've done really well, at least with that side. For the amount of money, they give me 50% of the 60% of the royalties. I got to look at my contract, but it's over 50% of the royalties come back to me on sales. And so for that, I get cover artists, I get editing, and then they handle a small part of the marketing. The marketing still falls mostly on the author, regardless of which path you choose. If you end up getting traditionally published, or if you end up working with a small press, or if you're going to have to do marketing on your own, most likely. Every now and then, if like a publisher feels like that your book is going to resonate with an audience, they can do advertising accordingly. But a huge amount of advertising falls onto the author, the marketing of their book. And then when you do that, and that's been, if you're in small press or traditional public, like when small presses came along, that was one of the first things I think that started to go with traditional publishing, because they had to keep up with these small presses that were operating. And so one of the things I think that happened is they started cutting like the marketing department, because especially if they ended up grabbing an author who had been previously working with a small press who did all that on their own, it was like one less expense for a publisher, and they already have so much expenses built into the book. If you've ever self-published a book on like Ingram Sparks or even Amazon to some extent, you know that there is costs built in. So like if you were going to order a bunch of books to do a signing, they've already built in the cost of that. So there is a certain level of cost based on pages, based on size, based on those sorts of things. So I think publishers started to look for areas where they could go ahead and cut costs. One of the other things is that when I'm looking at all of this too, is my comfort level with self-publishing is very low. And for the exact reasons I stated, is the editing side of it, finding an editor. I could probably do that. But then that costs money all up front. So, and I've actually been keeping like a tally of editors that I would like to use. I'm a big person on lists. I have Excel lists for agents, for publishers, and then I have one now for editors specifically. The artist thing seems much easier to find, because there are so many people where I could buy like a pre-designed cover art or whatever. So there's like that. So you could kind of cut costs that way if you wanted to. But editing seems like a thing that anybody who's self-published and does it very well will tell you not to cut costs on that particular aspect of your book. So, and I would agree. So there's that cost built in, as well as like I would work with a different editor than the ones I have worked with based on their skill set or whatever. So like I would want somebody who does specifically historical romance and would be able to help do the development or content edit. I think writing wise, my stuff is pretty clean. I use like spell checker, and honestly, if you're gonna self-publish, before you even go to like Critique Partners or whatever, make sure you're using whatever software, grammar check, spell check that your software program has built into it, because it'll save you some time later. That's not to say that it's the end all be all for catching everything, and that's usually why you need an editor. So I think it depends on what you're looking for, to what your genre is, and then also what your cost basis is. So, pay for what you can afford. But from what I've heard, the two biggest expenses for indie publishers are going to be cover art and or editing, depending on where the author's skills set lays. So I don't know. It's a toss-up. So traditional publishing has a certain amount of appeal in the sense that I would love to give my projects to an agent and have them just find me the publisher, so I wouldn't have to do that work and I could work on writing. But I do love doing the research part too on editors. That's one of the reasons I went with small presses, is because the contracts were so easy. I mean, it was pretty self-explanatory what you were going to get going into a contract. And the other thing is my husband has like kind of a legalese background prior to him starting this business. He was also in the Army for like 20 years before he retired, but he has this legalese, so I always gave him contracts to look over. As a matter of fact, when I was doing my steampunk book, The Courtesan of Constantinople, I had him look over a contract because I was looking at a publisher who was overseas that would have done foreign language for me. And he looked over the contract and there was some language in there that he didn't. Basically, if they got sued, I was being sued, was kind of the gist of it. If somebody took them to court or whatever, then I would also be liable. And not just for my book titles, for whatever titles they had. So it was like a broad language term that... he was like, no, don't sign this. And so he's like, if you do sign it, cross that out and make sure that's not in there. So I always have him look over my contracts. But for the most part, small presses have these boilerplate contracts that are pretty consistent throughout all the different small presses or whatever. So, and some small presses like Entangled and Carina are also larger. They're kind of like feeders for HarperCollins and for Harlequin, which is also HarperCollins. So, I mean, you kind of have these ins in those small presses into the bigger presses. So that's kind of a comforting thing too. Like you could get kind of grabbed out of that. So I don't know. It's a big toss up as to what to do. So, and the other thing is too, is that it gets frustrating when you're going ahead and you're submitting work and you get rejection letters, or worse, nothing at all, which I hate that even more. I'd rather have a publisher reject me straight out and say, this is, it's not working for us, it's whatever, than sit there and wait and see, especially the ones that want to have they want exclusivity. They're like, no simultaneous submissions or no simultaneous submissions, which basically means you can only submit to them. And I usually will not do that until I've exhausted my other lists, because I would rather have people that want to look at it and can get back to me and say yes or no. And I don't know if going into the summer is the best time to submit to publishers anyway, because are they all on vacation? Maybe they like to read over the summer. I don't know. It's just so frustrating. So I don't know. As soon as I decide what I'm going to do with this story, I will totally share it with you, my audience. I will also give you guys some links for some stuff that I'm working on. So I think this summer anyway, it's going to be kind of quiet, because I'll probably finish editing the first part and then maybe submit the second part. So maybe by fall, when people are ready to start looking at work, that might be a good time to submit it. I don't know. It's so frustrating. So I'll just do some slow writing. I'm also trying to finish up a paranormal romance, and that's been moving slowly too. So, and I think a lot of that has to do with my parents' recent passing and just like the overwhelmingness of having to deal with their estate. So that's been more than a little frustrating. And now we're going into our work season or whatever, and stuff isn't resolved. So I think that's creating a certain amount of stress. I have been doing my morning pages every day, so that's been helpful. But yeah, I just don't know what to do with traditional publishing versus indie publishing versus small presses, because every time I produce a piece of work, it's like a challenge for me to try and figure out where to find a home for it. And I would really rather it wasn't. This is one of the reasons I would love to have an agent, just because I'd love to just turn it over for them and have them find the publisher, or just say, nope, this one's not marketable. And then I would know, okay, I can go to book boutiques with this, or I can go and indie publish this myself. So anyway, well, that is all I have for today. Our next lunch is going to be, I had it open to the page, July 2nd at 11:30. And it may be pre-recorded depending on whether or not I'm working, or perhaps if you're lucky enough, I will record it at the airport. So Friday, July 2nd, 11:30, pencil me in for lunch.